January 16, 1979. A Boeing 727 sits on the tarmac at Mehrabad Airport in Tehran. A man walks toward it, composed, unhurried, almost serene. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. He is leaving his country. He will never return. In the days that followed, something happened that almost no one reported. Quietly, without ceremony, dozens of Israeli officials packed their bags. They closed their offices in Tehran. They booked their flights, and they left. The greatest alliance Israel had ever built in the Middle East had just ceased to exist overnight. But here's what makes this story truly strange. Israel and Iran had been secret partners for 30 years. They had shared intelligence, traded weapons, built pipelines together. Israeli engineers had worked in Iranian fields. Iranian students had studied in Tel Aviv. The two countries had done everything that allies do, except admit it. So how did this happen? How do two countries build a secret alliance across 30 years and then watch it collapse in a single winter? The answer begins not in 1979, it begins in 1948. And the first thing you need to understand is this: neither country wanted to be friends. To understand why, you have to understand what the Middle East looked like in 1947. It was a region being redrawn. Empires were retreating. New nations were being born from the wreckage of old ones. And every border being drawn was drawing blood somewhere. The British had held Palestine under a League of Nations mandate since 1920. They were leaving, and they were leaving a problem behind them. Two peoples, one land, no agreement. The United Nations stepped in to decide. A special committee was formed. 11 countries sat on it. Iran was one of them. In 1947, the United Nations voted whether to partition Palestine into two states. Iran was on the special committee that drafted the proposal. Iran voted against it. Not because of hatred towards Jews. Iran's Jewish community was ancient, respected, rooted. But because Iranian leaders believed partition would ignite a war that would never end. They were not wrong. Iran's representative argued that you can't solve one injustice by creating another, that drawing a new border through someone else's home was not a solution. It was a postponement. Nobody listened. The vote passed. The border was drawn. When Israel declared independence in May 1948, Iran did not recognize it, officially, publicly, on paper. But behind closed doors, the calculation was already shifting. The young Shah, 28 years old, newly reinstated after a political crisis, was watching the region. He saw what the Arab states were doing. He saw what the Soviet Union wanted. And he saw a small new country that was, against all odds, still standing. The Arab states had launched a war the day Israel declared independence. 5 armies, 1 objective. They lost. Israel not only survived, it expanded. The Shah watched this and drew a conclusion that would shape the next 30 years. This new country was going nowhere. And a country that was going nowhere was worth talking to. By the early 1950s, a quiet trade had begun. Iranian oil was flowing to Israel through a pipeline, through tankers, through intermediaries. Israel, in return, was offering something the Shah desperately needed: technology, agricultural expertise, and eventually, military cooperation. There was no treaty, no signed agreement, no press release. The alliance existed in the spaces between official statements. Iran had oil in abundance, but lacked the technical knowledge to develop its fields efficiently. Israel had engineers, agronomists, irrigation experts, a nation that had learned to make deserts bloom. The exchange was practical, transactional, but it was also something more. It was a signal. Two countries telling each other quietly, "We see you, we are watching, we are open." This was the doctrine both nations quietly shared. The enemy of my Arab neighbors is my potential friend. Israel called this the Periphery Doctrine. The idea was elegant in its simplicity. If the Arab states in the center of the region were hostile, and build relationships with the countries on the edges, Iran, Turkey, Ethiopia, countries that were not Arab, not in the immediate line of conflict, and potentially open to a different kind of relationship. For Iran, the logic ran the other way, but arrived at the same place. The Shah feared Arab nationalism. He feared Soviet influence. Israel was a counterweight to both. Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt was the voice of Arab nationalism in the 1950s. He spoke of a unified Arab world that would stretch from the Atlantic to the Gulf. He wanted to absorb or destroy every monarchy, every regime that stood in his way. The Shah was on that list, and Nasser had friends in Moscow. So when Israel came offering a quiet relationship, the Shah said yes. Not publicly, never publicly, but yes. The relationship had a rhythm to it. Iranian delegations would visit Israel under the cover of agricultural missions. Israeli military advisors would travel to Tehran as business consultants. Documents were stamped with vague corporate names. Flights were routed through third countries. The secrecy was not embarrassment, it was architecture. Both sides understood that the alliance could only survive if it stayed invisible. In 1957, something was built that would define the next 2 decades: SAVAK, Iran's secret police, the Sazman-e-Etelat Amniyat, the National Intelligence and Security Organization. It was founded with American help and Israeli help. Mossad agents trained SAVAK's early operatives. Israeli intelligence shared methods, shared infrastructure, shared interests. SAVAK would go on to become one of the most feared security services in the world. Its methods were brutal, its reach was long, and its origins were, in part, Israeli. This is the detail that history tends to skip over because it complicates the story. Israelis were not just trading oil and oranges with Iran. They were helping build the apparatus of repression that kept the Shah in power. And the Shah, whatever he was the alliance. Without him, none of it existed. SAVAK monitored dissidents inside Iran and hunted them abroad. It infiltrated universities, mosques, newsrooms, political parties. It arrested, it interrogated, it disappeared people. No corner of Iranian life was beyond its reach. And standing at its founding, quietly, technically, unofficially, was Israel. Through the late 1950s and early 1960s, the relationship deepened. El Al flights connected Tel Aviv and Tehran, coded, discreet, routine. Thousands of Israelis lived in Iran. Iranian students studied at the Technion in Haifa. Joint agricultural projects, joint construction projects, joint arms deals. By one estimate, at its peak, Iran supplied 60% of Israel's oil. Let that number settle. 60%. Through a secret pipeline that the world was not supposed to know about. The pipeline ran from the oil fields of Iran to the port of Eilat on the Red Sea. From Eilat, tankers moved the oil north through the pipeline to Ashkelon on the Mediterranean. It was a piece of infrastructure that rewrote Israel's strategic position. Oil meant energy, energy meant industry, industry meant military capability. Iran was not just selling Israel a commodity, it was underwriting Israel's survival. But now we reach the complication, because while all of this was happening at the level of governments, something very different was happening at the level of the street. In 1963, a cleric spoke out. His name was Ruhollah Khomeini. He was not yet what he would become, but he was already dangerous. He condemned the Shah's ties to Israel, publicly, loudly. He called the Shah a puppet. He called Israel an occupier. He was arrested, he was exiled. He did not stop. Khomeini had been watching Iran change for years. The Shah's White Revolution, a program of land reform, women's suffrage, westernization, had infuriated the clerical establishment. They saw their authority being stripped away, their land redistributed, their schools replaced, their version of Iran being erased. Khomeini spoke for that fury, and he found a target that united every strand of opposition: Israel. Here is the seed of the ending. The Shah's alliance with Israel was not a secret from Iranians. It was an open secret. Everyone knew and no one said. But Khomeini said, and for millions of Iranians who despised the Shah, Israel became inseparable from everything they hated about him. SAVAK, Western influence, corruption, humiliation. The alliance that was meant to strengthen the Shah was slowly poisoning him. Whoever the Shah called friend, the people of Iran were learning to call enemy. The Six-Day War in 1967 made things worse. Israel's stunning victory electrified the world. It also hardened the battle lines of Middle Eastern identity. Arab nations rallied. Palestinian solidarity intensified. Iran officially condemned Israel at the United Nations. Unofficially, the oil kept flowing. The arms kept moving. The two governments kept meeting. In 6 days, Israel had tripled its territory. It held the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, and the Golan. The images of Israeli soldiers at the Western Wall circled the globe. For the Arab world, it was a humiliation without precedent. For Khomeini, in exile, it was a recruitment tool. He had been telling Iranians for years that the Shah served foreign masters. Now, those masters were standing on Arab land, and the Shah had not said a word. The Palestinian cause became the central moral drama of the Muslim world, and every Iranian who cared about Palestine, student, communist, Islamist, nationalist, looked at the Shah's silence and understood it perfectly. He was not silent because he was neutral. He was silent because he was complicit. Through the early 1970s, the Shah seemed untouchable. Oil prices exploded after the 1973 Arab oil embargo. Iran's revenues quadrupled. The Shah bought American weapons. He built palaces. He modernized cities. He declared Iran the next great power. Israel, which had not joined the Arab oil embargo, continued to receive Iranian oil throughout the crisis. The relationship at this moment was at its apex. Neither government could have imagined what was coming. The Shah was hosting state visitors at Persepolis, celebrating 2,500 years of Persian monarchy.